Today is the third day of this August-September 1984 7-day retreat. And today we will work on a koan, also from the collection called Mumonkan. The title is Abandoned Words and Speaking. Someplace else the title says Abandoned Words and Silence. And the koan reads as put together by several translations. A monk asked Fuketsu, both speaking and silence transgress. Both speaking and silence transgress. How can we be free and non-transgressing? And Fuketsu said, how fondly I remember Konan in the springtime. The partridge sings among the scented flowers. Which is a poem of a Chinese poet. The question, I read in the notes, that the monk posed to Fuketsu is also a quote, that both speaking and silence are relative and therefore transgress. I left the relative out. Both speech and silence transgress. He's quoting an ancient master. And Fuketsu responds with this poem. He himself is from that province of Konan, which it says in the notes is supposed to be one of the most beautiful, lovely areas of China, in which he grew up, and he says this poem, or 2 lines of the poem, how fondly I remember Konan in the springtime. The partridge sings among the scented flowers. Part of Mumen's commentary is Fuketsu's words. Fuketsu works like lightning. He has his way and marches along, but why does he rely on the tongue of the ancient poet and does not get rid of it? Later on he says, abandon words and speaking and say something. And Mumon's poem, which I read in the notes, is also a quote of something another master said, is, he used no high-flown words. Before the mouth is opened, it is revealed. If you keep on chattering glibly, no, you will never get it. He used no high-flown words. Before the mouth is opened, it is revealed. If you keep on chattering glibly, no, you will never get it. It here is both times in quotation marks. Another pregnant word, it. Words and silence. Speaking and being silent. And here it is said that both transgress. Can we look at that? in what way or when it is that words as well as silence transgresses. There are, of course, many ways of looking at it. In saying, there's a bird calling, the word bird and the word calling are not that. Those are words, descriptive words. But the word bird is not that. The word calling or chirping is not that. Do you see that? Do you understand that? Is that clear? Saying the wind is rustling in the leaves is not that. It's a description. And if we begin to observe ourselves very carefully, attentively, meticulously in how we talk, and listen, we may find that most of the time we don't go beyond words and the meaning of words. We're not in touch with, or even trying to get in touch with, what the words refer to, or try to find out what a person or oneself really means when using words. Because words have become automatic for us. Our speech flows very automatically according to how we've learned to speak, kind of culture we grew up in, kind of people we particularly liked or worshipped, their way of talking and expressing things, the way our teachers may have trained us to speak, the whole religious language with which we may have been indoctrinated, the slang, the idiomatic expressions, witty expressions, they're all part of a repertoire which, when tapped, sort of flows out automatically. And as one becomes more and more attentive, often to one's surprise or sometimes great embarrassment, one hasn't wanted to say that. And here it's come out. One didn't quite mean that. Or didn't mean that to say that at all. And yet there it came out, triggered and delivered. Our ideas about religion, God, truth, Buddha, nature, whatever. The words we use are learned and repeated. The ones who uttered them or wrote them may have just repeated them. And one feels often on sacred ground when one utters religiously words from the field of religion. Just the other day, I was invited to a wedding. And there was a reception afterwards, and I sat next to an older lady and her husband. And after having told me at great length what she's been doing during her life and her recent serious illnesses, etc., etc., she asked, "What are you doing? You look like a businesswoman." She herself had been in businesses, I felt was a compliment. And this already impeded the flow of words. I felt very much put on the spot. And yet she asked, I don't want to weasel out. So I told her I work in a meditation center. And that was something she had obviously not expected. And she said, what kind of meditation is that? And I was put on the spot again. So the word came out, Zen, Zen meditation. And she or her husband seemed to have, I think her husband had heard something about it. He seemed to sort of nod with some recognition. And if I remember correctly, at that point I mentioned that we had severed all ties with the Buddhist religion. And she immediately asked, "Do you have ties to other religions?" And I felt put on the spot again, because there was more than sheer interest, and she wondered, what is she doing? It was so very palpable. I said, "No, there's no tie with any religion." And then she said, "Do you believe in God?" And so much was going on with this question, feeling the milieu in which she had grown up, the whole milieu of the whole wedding party. We had just gone through some ceremonies there where God or Christ was invoked, I don't know how many times, as having brought these people together, and where one wanted to cry out at every moment, "How do you know that? Have you tested that, looked into that? Is that really so?" So much was put onto these two people who had chosen to have this put onto them. But of course, how do we choose according to how we're brought up and what is considered the right way of getting married, etc. So in this question, do you believe in God? I felt a threat, a certain threat, and a being threatened on the part of this lady. A demand to hear something that would relieve some anxiety. There was so much there. And I said, "No, in this work you don't believe. You try to find out for yourself, in the case of God, if there is such a thing as God, or what this word God may refer to in reality." At this point she changed the conversation. Or other things were interfering, but it was the end of that. And I realized again what a loaded word the word God is for a culture, civilization in which God has been a word and a concept and a threat and if you've grown up in this civilization, this culture. You may say, why do you say a threat? Well, to me growing up and reading quite a bit in the Old Testament, New Testament, because I had a little Bible, I liked to read stories and there were nice little pictures in it, which I looked at thoroughly. I can still see some of those pictures. And the statement that this God is an angry God imprinted itself very deeply on the mind. The picture where Adam and Eve are sort of crouching behind a tree, looking anxiously whether they will be discovered, and there is this God's eye which sees everything, because they couldn't hide. Imprinted itself. And then the first and two commandments, which of course we had to learn by heart for becoming confirmed. Even in school, when I started school, religion was still part of the school subjects, which was then, of course, very quickly eliminated during Hitler times. First two commandments are, I know them in German, I have to translate it. I am the Lord your God, thou shalt not have other gods beside me. That's threatening. Wherever you looked, you could have transgressed and be punished. For a timid child, a very effective way of keeping in line, being kept in line. The second commandment, shall not use the name of your God in vain, for God will not leave unpunished him or her who will use his name in a wrong way, or something like that. I don't know why I'm quoting this to you. You must all know it. Maybe not. A loaded word. And one doesn't really even know what it stands for. And yet loaded with emotions, with associations, memories, feelings, fears, hopes. And all one has is a picture in the mind of a bearded old man, sometimes looking quite benignly upon his creation. There's one nice picture in the Sistine Chapel where there's this cloud of Adam and Eve approaching God, and Eve sort of looks out there with some life in her face. She kind of looks at this God. She doesn't seem to be afraid. She's curious. Pictures. Words. And we use them so glibly, so freely. Children are told by their parents, God loves you, or Jesus loves you. What does it mean? And not quite the same, but very similar things in every other religion. The prayer we used to recite at the funeral, a Buddhist prayer, almost admonishing Buddha to do his duty, to not forget his vows, to guide these souls, or what wasn't souls, these dead, whatever, safely to a better existence. or one was told to put oneself into a good relationship with Buddhas, and all one had was pictures, statues, frescoes, prints, and one even bowed to them. In a repentance ceremony, if I remember right, the Buddha afterwards was forgiving. I don't know whether it's really Buddhism or whether it's sort of a new assimilation of Buddhist and Catholic traditions. I don't know, I haven't studied it. God isn't the only loaded word. I picked it out because it so recently occurred. If one reads newspaper articles, depending on who accuses whom, loaded words are used about the other party, members of the other party, which immediately appeal to the emotions. One emotes and doesn't think clearly, because the language is so powerful. It is a powerful program linked up in the body-mind with glands, organs, muscles. Each word is, each thought is. You find this out particularly when you sit and a thought darts through the mind and the heart starts pounding, or the stomach feels nauseous. Aroused by a word or a memory that is linked with the word, associated with it. And most of the time we're not in touch with what the word really stands for. We've never examined it, put our energy and attention into it. We just use words as it were on a completely separate level from everything else. We can converse without any depth to our conversation. Just because both of us understand the meaning of a word, we can bat it back and forth, and nothing has been said or communicated or understood on any deep level, meaning to see directly within oneself what it is one is talking about. And talking takes almost most of our waking hours. We talk, and we talk often in our sleep, maybe not audibly, but in our dreams we have conversations and arguments or whatever. Words also take up our dreams, also images, of course. But right now here we talk about words. And what do we talk about most of the time when we don't talk, as we say here, work-related conversation? When we get together, what do we talk about? A good part of the time. I may be wrong, but it seems, in thinking about it, that most of the time we talk about others, about other people. We gossip. Or are we genuinely interested in throwing some light upon what happened with this person when this happened, in relating to him, or when somebody else related to him or her, what really happened, and try to explore it and shed light and understanding? Then it is really helpful. Even though it's more helpful if that person is there too, to to hear what is talked about him or her, so that one can also hear his or her side of it. But very often, look at it and watch it as we continue talking about other people, if we do, and we very certainly will, most likely will. Why are we talking about other people? It is a very, very worthwhile activity to look into, superficially and deeply. What all goes on? What are the motives for doing it? One may discover an enormous amount of stuff about oneself. There's the freedom and the honesty to really look at the motive of why one talks about other people. Whether it gives one feelings of superiority to talk someone else down. Sometimes it's a subtle revenge. One hasn't been able to face that person directly and say what one wanted to say to his face or her face. So one does this in absentia with someone else and gets a certain belated satisfaction. And if that other person agrees with one, what a so-and-so he or she is, then one delights or takes comfort in the support, in the camaraderie of two people now, or maybe 3 or 4 sharing in seeing how bad or whatever this other person is or has been. And all the while, things happen from this talk. It isn't something that happens and then is finished, but images are built up in the minds of the talkers about the person that one talks about. Maybe somebody's there who's never known this person, but he or she now gets an image of a person that he's never met or she has never met. And the way the brain works, if there's not meticulous attention and also the great need to attend, a felt urgency for attending to all of this, if that is not there, one will meet that person already with an idea of what he's like or she's like and have prejudice, good or bad. One will not be able to meet this person freshly unless one realizes one has an image and puts it aside as quickly as it arises, or at least gives the person the benefit of the doubt. Or else something is already set up. There's already the relationship is not clear. It is already prejudiced, jaded. Weighted, loaded, for or against. And one may be surprised how come this person isn't open with one, or one senses if one is sensitive that other people have an image of one. Very often one feels the pressure of that image, and if there's not great energy of attention, the pressure of that image makes one conform to it or fight it. Again, preventing just meeting each other on a fresh, clear, new basis. And yet people do ask us, gets letters for recommendation. Some firm wants to employ somebody and one gets a letter, could you recommend this person? Please tell us all about what you know about him or her. Or somebody doesn't write a letter but says, going to work for so-and-so or work with such and such a person. Can you tell me something about this person? Does one just say, I never talk about other people? That may be evading a responsibility. I don't know. One has to see right at the moment what motives come up and how the whole situation can be helped or hindered by maybe saying something about this person. And yet, can one be very precise how it happened, namely in relationship with oneself, or that one has heard it secondhand? The person may have changed, or he may have just responded, or she responded to me that way. To always have this there so that we don't fixate one another in pictures, molds, which then sit there lodged in the mind and crop up, coming in between. It all comes out of one's whole feeling for people. Both those who one feels very congenial with and those who give one a hard time. Is there basically respect for all people? And respect not a show of something or a dutiful attitude toward people, but a genuine respect. Meaning, let me find out about you, or what happened yesterday. I know very well it's not all of you. It was the whole situation which brought this about. It was very clear when one looked at it. Not zeroing in on something, but opening it up and looking at the whole situation. Respecting whatever happens as it happens, whatever is as it is. The word respect having in it the word seeing. Means, again, one could say taking a new look. Regardless of whatever heard about you or him or her, or how I may have reacted in the past, can that be put aside and we meet each other anew? Regardless of the gossip that I myself have engaged in, spreading images about other people, all about myself. And since it has been brought up, it has been looked into, pointed out, can one be ever so careful and circumspect, aware, in this so ever so delicate matter of talking about other people? Because untold damage and heartache has been done with that. And once done, so hard to undo. For oneself, one can always wipe it out. It is given to oneself to wipe out images by attending, listening now to what is right in front of me, and seeing memory pictures as that, as not being the real person, the real thing. Do you see why it's so utterly important to see the difference clearly in one's mind? Because it's the mind that projects images, creates them. And it is attention that can wipe them out. Attention has that wiping power when it is. The energy of attention wipes out memory images that are harmful or divisive, separating, or just plain a burden, like a grudge is a burden. Maybe not to everyone, maybe some people love to nurture their grudges. It's something to do, something to occupy the mind with. One finds this often in old people who are lonesome, frustrated, busy nurturing old grudges against people, locked into that, and the brain sort of ossifies with that. It is not free to drop and perceive freshly. So maybe we've said enough for right now how words and speaking can transgress. And what about silence? In what way can silence transgress? Which is a quote here. Because there are so many different kinds of silences. One silence is when one is too scared to say something. One feels threatened by the person who asks a question, or one is scared to be laughed at, made a fool of, or be told off, not respected for what one says, disrespected, humiliated. All our previous experiences are the tail that wags the present silence. It's not real silence, it's just controlling oneself not to say anything so to avoid hurt. Or sometimes incapable, paralyzed to say something for fear of that one may be punished for what one says, ostracized. In talking to each other, so often people will tell me in counseling, I ask her or him something and she just won't answer, she won't say anything, or he won't speak. Maybe one needs to watch carefully how one speaks to a person. Maybe there is threat, dominance, or something, or a trying to extricate something from that person. Power expressed in the words, even though one doesn't say it, but it can be picked up, and therefore the person will not answer. It's demand of one say something. Often parents say this to their children. Tell me what happened in school. Why are you crying? Speak up or something. I want to know. I want to find out why the teacher called up today. She told me. You tell me now. How can the child possibly say anything? Unless it tells a lie, it becomes proficient in telling a lie to get out of this very embarrassing or threatening situation. And then the parent may be upset that my child lies, and rather than finding out why does he or she lie, there must be a reason for it. Because children, without any threat or fear of punishment, don't lie. They tell straightforward what they see. They don't know any reason for not doing it. So to watch very carefully if one wants to talk about something, a problem that has arisen or has perpetually arisen, or is in how one approaches each other. Maybe starting with a silence and not threatening, so that neither feels threatened, prompted, or whatever, so that the defenses don't have to be the barrier between two human beings, which they are when there's threat, and we immediately defend unless again there's the energy of attention, which sees defense as so much useless barrier and burden. So what other silence is there? Somebody asks one something and one really doesn't know. Or one thinks for a moment. Usually we don't do that. We blurt out something just in order to be in the know, because this is the image we have of ourselves and want others to have of us, that we know. We all could take so much more time in answering questions and saying things, time and space, so that we don't just quickly blurt out something that is not really thought through, or comes again from some automatic word response rather than from looking what really is being asked about. Let me take a moment. But we so quickly want to assert ourselves as, observe it, let's observe it in relationship, in conversation. This is so valuable to see, because then there can be a change in this pattern which otherwise is so unproductive, productive of no communication, just assertion versus assertion of selves, which doesn't produce anything except feed self. One may be so have been so much hurt in relationship with people, or feel so incapable of really fruitfully communicating with people, because one feels one is not listened to, people don't want to hear me, don't want to hear what I have to say, that one may withdraw from relationships altogether into a state of silence and think that this is much more superior to all this inadequate communication that goes on among people. But by just withdrawing, nothing has been understood or resolved on a deep level. One may withdraw altogether from, quote, the world, unquote, to the mountains or desert, where one is not in immediate relationship with anybody. No one gives one a hard time, and one doesn't give others a hard time, which one doesn't want to do either any longer. There are many religious practices which help induce silence. because human beings have longed for silence in the midst of all the turmoil that we manage to create for ourselves and each other. There's always been this longing for silence, for something beyond the clash of words and all that goes with it. And innumerable systems are offered to induce silence. Very often a repetition of something, a word or sound. If done with consistency and increasing concentration, can induce a state which is felt as silence. But the mind isn't empty. It is filled with the repetition of the word and the longing for silence, and maybe the enjoyment of that silence. There is an enjoyer there, a meditator, a practicer, and what is being experienced. Which is not silence. It may be the silence that this old Zen teacher who's quoted here was referring to as transgressing. Sometimes it is called the silence of dead void sitting. So are there any words in any silence that don't transgress? Here, Fuketsu quotes a poem. Even though he probably well understands, I assume he well understands, that quoting without understanding what is quoted are words that transgress understanding. And yet he quotes it freely. It's a beautiful verse. Albeit it evokes memory, it comes from memory. Somebody asked me recently in a meeting, is it bad to have memory? Is memory always divisive? Find out whether a memory can be evoked and there be no loss of awareness. There be actually clear seeing of the partridge, clear hearing of the sound, scented flowers, the smell, all the senses here are as one. Momon saying, why did he have to quote some old master? He's laying a trap. Is one caught in a rule there must be no quotes? Everything one says must be original? I don't know whether there's one original word, except new words are created in our language. Language creates new words or new ways of putting words together. But there's actually no new thoughts or new words. They all come out of something old, some memory, something that has already happened. And yet, are the words themselves coming out of something that is seen, even though they are old tools? And not held onto, used flexibly, freely, easily dropped or exchanged for another word. Because they come out of emptiness, of no fixed concepts, and the understanding of what a concept is, and that it can never, never convey what is real, this instant. The moment you say it, the instant has already changed. No name can be put to this living reality, if you want to use that word. The word is not the living thing. What is a silence that does not transgress, that is not induced, manufactured, produced? And doesn't belong to anybody. It is nothing owned or possessed, has nothing to do with that. And in listening and talking to one another, can there be even an occasional touch with this silence, with not knowing, no prejudices, not anchored in anything, in no thing, including one's past experiences, real as they were? They're gone. What is now? Do I know? And can we talk and relate or be silent with one another out of this not knowing? And therefore new to listen, to speak, to look at ourselves and each other. It says here in the two bottom lines of the poem, if you go on chattering glibly, know you will never get it. And yet it's a fact that the mind keeps chattering glibly most of the time. Or does it? Listen. You don't have to label it. You don't have to know it. You don't have to describe it to anyone. Just listen. It is a fact that if one really wants to understand something deeply, meaning not just on the verbal level, the mind does slow down and become quiet. At least occasionally, at the moment where there's intense interest or urge to understand, to listen, to question. When one's whole being is in the attending, in the listening, questioning. And the mind begins to understand it has nothing to offer, it has nothing to contribute. We will end here for today.